Joining us on the panel. What better timing, at least for us, the Nationals leader David Littleproud. Did you pick up the phone and talk to your colleagues over there in the West before deciding to oppose this budgetary measure?
We've been in contact with our Western Australian colleagues.
Since the budget?
Yes, exactly, yes. And we've made it very clear to them that if this is a priority that's as significant to them as they articulate, then there is an opportunity within the Western Australian budget, in their reply speech, to use the surplus that Western Australia has, which is probably one of the most significant surpluses they've got, as well as the GST that they get. We actually have to take in the national interest, not just Western Australia's interests, and it's about priorities. Obviously, we'd like to be able to offer these types of programs, but we've got to look in the totality of what are the other challenges that this nation is facing up to.
So to clarify that, it's not the policy, but it's the money. It's not affordable for the federal government, so the state government
Well, not
can
at this
pay for
stage.
it.
It's not a priority for the government. When you've got a cost of living crisis, where you've got Australians sleeping in tents, and we've got an energy system that's out of control, and we're not addressing the fundamental drivers of that, wouldn't you think that the majority of Australians would want us, even those homeless people in Western Australia, expect that the alternative federal government would cast their mind to the most pressing issue of putting a roof over people's home, driving down inflation, and making sure that we set this economy up with spending their money in a very wise and measured way.
So your message is, don't mind the policy, you pay for it.
Well, and that's an opportunity. And I think in a state like Western Australia, and me being a Queenslander, I can tell you, we are very rich in the revenues that we are actually able to take out of the mining industry. If this is something that the Western Australian opposition see as a policy worthy, then they have the opportunity to actually enact that in some capacity in Western Australia themselves. And when you look at the fight we're getting with the other states around GST revenue, and I've got to say, I was at the cabinet table and stood up for Western Australia when that GST share was recast. I think it was fair. So I think, you can't...
So that should be factored in, they're getting such a good deal on that as well.
No, I'm saying I think what we need to do is look at the totality of this, and if this is an opportunity for the Western Australian government, this is a time where I think also that state governments have got to stop this business model of blaming Canberra and asking for more money. At some point, they're sovereign governments. They have the opportunity to raise funds, and particularly in a rich resource state such as Western Australia, there's an opportunity for them to do that.
Okay, well, let's talk about migration and what Peter Dutton's announcing. I'm sure you can't go to the specifics, but I've reported, he's looking at net migration of around 160 or as low as 160,000, significantly down from where Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese see it. What can you tell us about the reason for this?
Well, I'm not going to validate any of the numbers, obviously, but I'd never challenge where you get your numbers from either, Andrew. But look, obviously, we want to have a mature conversation about what is responsible migration. Again, when you're looking at a cost of living crisis, you're looking at a housing crisis, when we're only looking to be able to produce around 200,000 houses, and we're going to bring in 1.7 million people over the next 5 years. And then the government's only had this epiphany in the last couple of weeks that maybe part of that 1.7 million might need to be some tradies, might need some brickies, some plasterers, some roofers, some electricians. This is unplanned. And while the housing shortage sits squarely at state and local government's responsibility for failure of planning, you don't exacerbate it at a federal level by reckless migration. And you need to make sure that when you see that, and we had to shift the dial, we acknowledge that straight after COVID. But to do it in a fashion that they have has put pressure on and hasn't allowed for supply to catch up.
But if you have a drastic cut, could that become a real problem for the economy?
Well, that's where you'll see tonight that Peter will articulate getting that balance right across all migration, around all types of migration, and making sure we get that right, protecting the economy, but making sure that we're looking after our own and making sure that we give them that opportunity, particularly young people, that opportunity to go out and hopefully one day have a deposit to get into that.
What do you say to Jim Chalmers, who hinted that, he stated it, that this is a dog whistle?
No, well, I think the facts and the numbers are pretty clear. 1.7 million people, 200,000 homes is all they've been able to produce, and even the master builders are saying 1.2 is a pipe dream. So you've got to be honest with the Australian people. You can go in there and you can sell them all sorts of things. But ultimately, the practical reality out-trumps the ideology. And that's what you're going to get out of Peter Dutton and I. You're going to get some honesty. You're going to get back to basics, and we're going to look Australians in the eye, and we're going to tell them the truth. And when the numbers are as clear as that, I don't know how Jim Chalmers can sit there with a straight face.
Do you think this will be popular?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do. And I think there's going to be some things that Peter Dutton and I announce over the next 6 to 12 months that might necessarily be popular for everybody, but it's the right thing to do. This nation's in a mess and it needs strong leadership. It needs someone with the courage of their conviction to stand up and look people in the eye and say, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to get back to basics. We're going to rebuild this nation from the wreck that this last 2 years has put us on. And we're going to be honest with the Australian people. What you see is what you'll get out of us. And we're not afraid to do that. And I think that's the sort of leadership that this country is looking for.
The coalition's announced that it will reverse the government's decision to end live sheep exports. Why is that important, and was it difficult getting Susan Lee on board, for example? She's previously introduced bills against it.
No, Peter Dutton and I have a coalition agreement that the first principle is that the live sheep export industry will remain, and we will bring it back if we're not elected beforehand. The reason it is so important is that you will see the senseless death of millions of sheep from countries out of Africa who will take this market up from Australia, who do not have our animal welfare standards. Animals Australia, RSPCA, are morally bankrupt. They are not telling Australians the true story about us vacating this space and the science and the animal welfare standards that we have surpass anyone else in the world, not only in the transport, but in the processing. And all this will do is see the senseless slaughter of millions of sheep. They are morally bankrupt. It shouldn't matter where a sheep comes from, whether they're from Sudan, Ethiopia or Australia. I would have thought animal activists would have valued that sheep equally, but apparently not.
The only way to fulfil a pledge on immigration, is to remove the demand-driven system. That's going to have to happen, isn't it? Because when you talk about net migration, that factor, demand-driven and the temporary places are what are really driving it up. So that's going to have to be in tonight's speech.
Well, I'm not going to foreshadow that. Peter and I are...
It's clear, isn't it?
Well, no, I'm not going to foreshadow anything. I think it's important that Peter gets the clear air to articulate his vision and our vision as the Nationals and the Liberals.
I mean, you're saying Labor...
where we'll move on from there. And that's about honesty.